Hello everyone, Suhail this side. Welcome back to our channel. So this would be the third video in the Kafka Zero to Hero series. Before moving towards this video, let's discuss what we understand till now, what we have covered in the last two videos. So in the first video, we have covered what is Kafka and why there is a need of Kafka, right? Then in the second video, we understand the different terminologies, that what is broker, controller, who are leaders, who are followers. Then we understand where actually the data gets stored into the Kafka, that is topic, right? Then we understand the importance of replication factor and why we need an replication factor, right? We understand all these things. Then we understand what is producer, what is consumer. Then we understand, move ahead, and we understand why Kafka people move to Kraft, our zookeeper. We have understand all these things. So I would suggest whoever has not watched the earlier two videos, please watch these two videos, because the later section of the Kafka series would be completely based on this basic understanding, right? So now let's move to the third video. That in this video today we'll set up Kafka in our local machine. Okay, now so first of all, that Kafka is built on top of Java and Scala, right? So it means there is a prerequisite which we need to have in our local machine, that is we need to have Java installed on our machine. That is the prerequisite, right? Now for installing the Kafka, there are two options. Either we can download the Kafka binary directly and we can unzip the binary on our machine, and similar to we download the Java JDK, and we give the path, and we give the bin path right into the path variable. Similar kind of logic here. We need to download the Kafka binary, and then we have to give the bin path directory path to the path variable, right? So that is the same path, right? Now the second option could be we can run the Docker Kafka container from the Docker image. So that is the second part. So I would prefer the second option, that to run the Docker container from the Kafka Docker image. So you just don't need to worry at all. So I have already created the Kafka Docker image and published onto the Docker Hub, but I'll let you know all the steps what I have done in the Docker image, and so that later on if you want to really tweak something, you can do on your own, and you can test it along with the new learning, right? So that's how we'll do. So but there could be some people who don't want to run the Docker container due to XYZ reasons, but I would explain both the options how we can do. So let's first discuss how we can install the Kafka binary directly without using the Docker container, right? So if you open the browser, right? So if you open the browser, you just need to type Apache Kafka download. You will get a first link, that the downloads page for the Kafka, and on this link if you go, there would be binaries available here, right? For example, 3.9.0 version is there, 3.8.1 version is there. So for this series I'm using 3.8.1. so you can see here that this would be the binary, right? So if you directly click on this link, the binary will directly get downloaded on your machine. But if you click on this, right, and for example here I have just copied the link, the same link I have used in my Docker image, I'll show you there as well. So you don't need to worry. Either you can download the Kafka binary, or you can have the Kafka image, Docker image, which I have already created with the same version, right? Whatever I am explaining here, right? Now let's see, once you get this zip, right? If you extract this zip, what would be the contents in this particular folder? So I have done that part as well. For example, this is the old version which I have already was using, but for this series I have upgraded this to the latest version. So I'm just explaining you what would be the contents. It would be the same at all, just the version number is changed. If you extract it, right, if you extract it here, so you would see these kind of directories, the bin, config, libs, and the other things, right? So like you download the Java version JDK, right? So there also you see the bin directory, right? And you usually give the bin directory path to the environment path variable. So similar kind of logic here. So that why you need to give the bin directory path to the path variable, because you can run the Kafka commands from anywhere in your machine. That is the only reason. Either you can give into the path variable, or you have to, every time you have to come to this directory and run the commands directly. But it would be better to give the bin directory path to the path variable, so that you can access it from anywhere in your machine, right? Now if you see the bin directory, you see there is Kafka console producer, Kafka console consumer. So you see the start, right? Kafka server start .sh. I will just show you here as well that Kafka server start, Kafka topics is there, right? So Kafka server start, I'm looking at the file Kafka server start CDE FG, yeah, this is the one, right? So if you see, this is the Kafka server start.sh. So this is the command which we need to run to start the Kafka server, right? And while running this command, we need to give this server properties. That is some properties file where we can tweak some of the changes. For example, where should be the log directory would be created, or where who would be acting as a broker, or who would be acting as a controller. I'll explain all those things, but this is the main command for running the Kafka server. And similarly, Kafka server stop.sh. So start and stop are there in the bin directory, right? So in the config directory, if you see here, the server properties are there, right? And if the people are using Zookeeper in your organization, then Zookeeper properties gets used. But we are interested in the Kraft, so we'll see the Kraft, right? So here if you see here the broker dot properties and the controller dot property and the server dot properties. So ideally, what properties we would use? We would use the server dot properties of the Kraft. Why? Because we are using the Kraft, not the Zookeeper, right? I have already mentioned that why we are using Kraft, because in your organization you might need to get a work on Kraft, because Zookeeper is getting deprecated soon. So that is the reason I have chosen Kraft, right? Now this is the same path, right? So this is how you can do this. You can unzip and you can have a look, right? Now I'll show you this similar thing what I have done in my Docker image creation, right? So that it would be simpler for you to all understand, right? Now what I have done, first of all, this is the Java 17 image, JDK 17 image, that which I am using, the Java 17 image. I was already using the Java 17 image with this name, so I did not change the Java 17 image. I just used the existing one which I was already using. So this is the link which I have just copied, right, from the copy link address. And what I am doing here is, this is the Docker file which we would be using for creating the image, first of all. So I am just adding this, downloading this zip from the internet, right? Now once this gets downloaded, I'm just extracting it. Then after extracting it, I'm just renaming this to particular directory. For example, if I extract it, you would find directory with this name, right? Now I'm renaming this with the Kafka directory name. Then the similar thing what I have already explained you, in the path variable I have added the Kafka bin path. So this is the work directory which I have created here with the name of practice, so that we can practice in this directory. And at the last there is a start.sh file, right? Now if you see here the CMD that we have, right, so we have the start.sh at the end of, once we run the docker run command, this command would be executed, right? Now if you see the start.sh command, the start.sh file, so if you see the cluster ID is needed, right? This is the start command. Once you why we need the cluster ID? Because as of now we are running the one Kafka server, right? That's all right. But now let's imagine if you have to run 3 Kafka servers, so those server would form a cluster, right? So in large organization, what happens, there might be multiple Kafka clusters, right? Now, for example, this cluster ID, where it is getting used, for example, if you want to communicate with another cluster, right? So when the data gets published, so the for example, the broker would say this kind of metadata, okay, I'm belong to this cluster ID, so okay, you belong to this cluster ID. So based on that, Kafka server can know, okay, that this is the data coming from different cluster and this is the data coming from same cluster or so. So that is why the cluster ID is important, right? Now the second option is the storage. Storage is actually the same thing. What is actually, for example, when you you can visualize with the database installation before inserting the data into the database table, you need to create something. You need to have the schema, you need to have the tables populated, right? So this storage is kind of similar, the same thing. There are some things which Kafka manage internally. Because why need to Kafka manage internally? Because Kafka is a stateful application, so it needs to have some kind of properties, files, or checkpoints, or some kind of metadata information it internally has to have, right? So that is why it has to give the cluster ID, right? And the same server dot properties, right? So accordingly, it would create the required files. If the files are not created already, if the files or metadata is already created, it would be ignored. Then finally, what we'll do, we'll just do the Kafka server start.sh command, right? And as I already mentioned, that in the start command, what we need to provide, we need to provide the server.properties file, right? So I'll show you while running this as well. For example, this is, I will check in the Docker image as well. For example, I have created the same setup folder, right? So I'll show the compose part as well, but let's see the image. Right now, in this image, the same file is there, right? The Docker file and the Docker start.sh, right? Now this is the same image which we would use in the Docker compose as well. Now you would ask, okay, now why you are using Docker compose instead of, earlier you said you would be using the Docker container? Because we need to, for example, this is the server dot properties, right? Now, for example, later on, if you need to modify some of the attributes, what you will do, you have to rebuild this Kafka image, right? And then run the Kafka container again, right? So there are few more things which you need to manage on your own. Because, for example, I'll show you the Docker compose file first, right? So this is the image which I have already published on my, the Docker hub. And this is the container name when the Kafka gets started, right? When we start up the broker. And this is the cluster ID, right? The cluster ID could be part as a environment variable, because most of the organization, this is a very kind of, it gets provided at the deployment stuff or deployment part only. So it should be a part of environment variable. The similar thing, kind of, we just mimic the setup like the organizations have, right? So we have the environment variable with the Kafka cluster ID, and the same Kafka cluster ID, if you see here in the Docker file, right, in the start.sh file, the same Kafka cluster ID is being used here, right? Because we need to put all the nodes or the brokers or the controller in the same cluster, right? So the cluster ID is there. Now the reason why I was preferring Docker compose, because, for example, here the server dot properties I can mount directly, right? And I can change the any of the properties without building the Docker image again and again. Similar to that, I can, for example, later on when we'd see in the same series, when we'll set up the Kafka cluster, right? Then if we don't use the Docker compose, we need to create or hit the individual commands for creating the Docker containers. There might be some mistakes which human can do, for example, giving the different port and giving the same port for the different container as well. And there are so many other things which would become more complex, right? So that is the reason why I am using Docker compose. The first reason is we can mount the directories or the files at the with the host, right? And the second option is we can actually set up the Kafka cluster easily with this Docker Compose, right? So these are two reasons. Now what I'll do is I'll try to use this because I have used the same Docker image. Now what I'll do, I'll just in my local machine, what I'll do is I'll just need to go in which path, right? So in this setup I'll check in both the things. So I'll show you, for example, if I go in the compose, right now here only I have the docker compose.yaml file. So if we go to the properties, right, so there we have mounted the server.properties file. So I'll show you what is the server.properties, right? Let's discuss first what are the server.properties, then we'll see the other part as well, right? Now if you see here, right, now these are the server dot properties which I was mentioning, that the broker controller, which this server where we are running, which the server which we are instantiating, what is the kind of role for this broker? Is it a broker or is it a controller? So since we are running only one node, so we have assigned both the roles, like the single node could be acting as a broker as well as controller. But since when we set up a Kafka cluster, for example, there could be 4 nodes, 5 nodes, so every node has a different ID, right? Since we have just single node, so the node.id could be single, so one, right? So as we already discussed, that the data gets stored into the Kafka topic, right? Since Kafka is a stateful application, but from where the data gets stored into the Kafka topic, but somewhere Kafka still has to write the data into the disk, but where it will write onto the disk. So this is the path. Actually the temp Kafka logs is the directory, is the path actually where the Kafka would write the messages into this directory. So these are the properties. Don't worry about these properties, I'll explain you in the later section when we'll create the Kafka cluster and all. I'll explain each and everything, but as of now you can just understand, okay, the process roles, node id and the log directory. Right now we can just what we can do is we can just do the docker compose, right? I'll just clear, right, lsltr, and if you see the docker compose file is there. Right now what I'll do is I'll just do the docker compose up, right? So I'll just do this part. Right now if you see the Kafka server has been started, right? So if you see the Kafka server has been started. Now if we scroll up and go and see, so if we see that container is started, and if you see here the formatting of storage is done, right? So now I'll show you the what kind of directories it has already created. So if you see what cluster id we are using test123, which we are already mentioned here, the docker compose file, right? The same cluster id is being used by the container. Now what I was explaining actually, okay, now if you see here, let's see the directories or metadata what it has created. For example, this is the logs, right? This is where the data gets stored, and Kafka manages all this data into this directory. Now let's see what is being created here. So first of all, this cluster metadata 0. So don't panic about what is this. The cluster metadata could be another topic in the Kafka, and this 0 is the partition which I'll come up in the later videos. But this is the kind of metadata which Kafka is managing. Based on this data only, it manages what topic and what are the consumers, which consumer has consumed messages till what point. So all these properties, metadata information, replication offset, so everything it manages in this directory, right? So this is where the Kafka manages all these things. Now if you open the another tab, for example, if I open the another tab, right? So if I open the another tab, now what I can do is I can do docker container ps-a, right? Now if you see here, if you go here, right, in this container, right, so there the practice directory has been created, right? For example, here the practice directory has been created. Now if I go to the Kafka, right, now inside this Kafka directory, what is there? What is there? cd bin ls, the same files which we have already seen in the local machine when we unzip the file, right? The Kafka server star.sh, right? Kafka console producer, Kafka console consumer, right? So all these files are the same. So the same setup has been being used here as well, right? So if we go into the config property, so in the config property, if we go into the Kraft, right? So there we have see the broker.properties, controller.properties, server.properties. So server.properties is actually the generic properties where we would what would be the log directory path, what is the kind of role for this broker or for this node, and the controller.properties and broker.properties, these are specific to the actual role, right? If this node is actually a broker, then this broker.properties would come in picture. If this particular node role is controller, then this controller.properties would come in picture. So that's all we have seen. So this is how actually the Kafka would be set up in your machine. Now if you go ahead, right, for example, if I show you now, right, so I guess otherwise the video would be much longer. So this was what I was trying to cover in this video. I was just trying to cover the setup part. So in the next videos, what we will cover actually, so we'll cover this following part. For example, firstly we'll create some topics and we'll see how to produce messages on the topic, and then we'll see the how the consumer on the other hand can consume the messages from the topic, right? But why I'm going through this, right? Before understanding consumer groups and partitions, it is very, very, very important to understand these things. Otherwise you won't realize actually what kind of problem the consumer group is solving, right? I just want to show you all the problems if we don't have the consumer group. That is what we will try to cover in the next video, right? Similar kind of the e-commerce system which we have for which I have already prepared a video, right? From for example, the design e-commerce system, I have already prepared the similar kind of system behavior. We will see, we will just instantiate the multiple, you can say, the payment services instances in the next video, and we'll see that what kind of messages are coming on this onto that consumers. So we'll see all the broader aspects of the consumers, right? And so if you have seen all this, and if you are getting the Kafka server started, so that was the whole goal for this video. So thanks a lot. So see you in next video, but please do like and comment, and so that it keep me motivated to publish more videos more quickly, right? So see you next video. Thanks a lot. Thanks.